How much is that?
Welcome to the Podcast Editors Mastermind, the podcast about the business side of podcast editing. And a couple weeks ago, I know the other Yetis had talked about AI and what that looks like for podcast editing. But a lot of people wanted to kind of think to the future and think about, like, what does podcast editing look like with the advancements in technology, and just like, are there still going to be human podcast editors in 5, 6, 7 years from now? And so tonight we brought on an incredible guest to help us tackle this big subject. First off, I'm Daniel Abendroth. You can find me at rothmedia.audio. My fellow Yeti here tonight,
Brian Ensminger. You can find me at toptieraudio.com.
So our guest tonight, as soon as we thought of this subject, like, this is the one person that popped in my head, like, this is somebody who I want to talk to about this subject. Jessie McEwen is a lifelong lover of music, got lost in music, and her details many people never paid attention to. I feel like I can relate to that. Just anytime I watch TV nowadays, like, I'm always hearing like all the unheard sounds that most people don't hear. But this led to a passion for guitar, sound design, and audio engineering. Jessie has spent the last 20 years working in his home studio, honing his music, audio engineering, and mixing skills. At Tansy Astor Audio, he's responsible for podcast production, engineering, and editing, running audio on shoots, and audio post-production. At Tansy Astor Academy, he helps editors develop their audio and business skills. Outside of work, he loves hiking, mountain biking, berry picking, and geeking out on music trivia. And it's those business skills that really show up in like the Podcast Editors Club. And somebody who just always stood out to me in podcasting circles, who, when it comes to business things, like, Jessie's always one that has like this really incredible insight. And so I couldn't think of anybody else better to talk about this subject. So Jessie, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for inviting me to talk about this topic.
So shall we get right into it? What does podcast editing look like in a few years? And are we going to have jobs, or do we need to start looking at something else? Did I say 30 years?
I don't know.
I think we're like talking like 2030 anyway. We're going to break it down into like, what does the dystopic future look like, as well as like, what does the utopic future look like?
I thought about this, and hopefully I'm wrong, but in the dystopian future, podcast editing is all done by the robots. And my job as a podcast editor going forward will be to walk into McDonald's and talk to the customers about why the robot messed up the order that was actually user error, and try and smooth things over so that the robots can stay focused on it. And all I will do is say, "Are you sure you don't want fries with that?" But that's like they're going to take my job away. So I'll back off of that one and let you guys share, like, what are some of the negative things that might happen for us?
I think that along what you were saying, that the bleak future version of this is where all we're doing is babysitting the process. And for someone like me, I love the audio work. I love the mixing part. If I can't participate in that, it's losing most of what I enjoy doing the job. So that's my biggest concern, is that with all of the AI, it's going to get to a point where we just hit record, push a few buttons, it cleans up the audio, it trims out all the filler words without the issues that other sites currently struggle with. And that's the process. People come to us to kind of babysit and fix the mistakes.
I see more of, and I don't know, is my fear kind of running my thoughts or what, but I think we've seen that in many other industries, just like moving up. So like, Brian, your description of like, like going to McDonald's and like talking to the people about like, user error makes me think of like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, when his dad like loses his job to the robot that can, screw on the toothpaste caps. Then he gets hired back to fix those machines. So yeah, it's great that he got hired back, but now you got one person doing what several people did. So I do see like a future where the actual editing and mastering and all that is probably done by AI. And I know a lot of people want to say like the technology just isn't there yet and it's going to be fine, like whatever. But I recently saw this article just talking about how even like the experts didn't predict like how much AI has improved over the last few years. And it's advancing a lot faster than a lot of people had thought. So I don't know if we're like too far out from AI, like, something like Descript being as good or at least close enough to what we can do as podcast editors.
So one of the things I've been wondering about, and this kind of ties back to a little bit of what we talked about the last time, at least so far, generative AI is not truly creative in my view. The best you get is something that's built on things that other people have done, that based on learning things, it learns the patterns and how to recreate them. And then with some level of randomization is able to, in quotes, create something that sort of complies with all of the rules and has a certain amount of randomization in there. What are the thoughts of you guys as far as whether or not that will get to a place where it truly can be creative and deliver something that's truly unique, not just based on something that was done before?
I'm sure it might get there in that far off future, but just look at what ChatGPT has done. A year ago, AI writing was not usable. Now, all of a sudden, if you know how to use it and really coach it and work with the prompts, you can get some very usable stuff that you don't have to tweak. I think with audio, we're always moving closer to that. We can probably do an entire mix entirely with no skill at this point. Between stuff like Sonable plugins, Hindenburg auto level stuff, we have loudness normalization, even without using Studio Sound or Adobe Enhanced Speech, we can get pretty solid results without really knowing much of what we're doing.
So like my kind of question to that is the current tools out there, because I think Auphonic it's come pretty far as like cleanup and as far as like the sound quality. So currently technology can't match what a good engineer can do, but doesn't need to. Like in the world where Zoom is kind of the standard, are we at a point where like Studio Sound and Auphonic and like these other tools are good enough?
There's actually a really good article. It was in Wired, I think 2009, talking about the good enough revolution. And if you read that article, it could have been written today. It's talking about how people don't care about high production value. Trying to chase that is probably a losing endeavor. When people want quick, they want convenient. Look at most music is listened to in lossy formats now. There's all kinds of, everywhere we look, we can see that high production value isn't what most people value. There's always going to be the people and companies that do want that because they understand top quality audio is going to help them stand out. But the average listener, they can't hear the difference.
I'm kind of piggyback on that because I'm wondering, I hate to use it this way, but I wonder if that's the separation between the pros and I hesitate to use the word amateur because amateurs can be really good and really care about what they do. But I have a hard time believing that a company like iHeart would fund a project that's going to put out Zoom quality audio. Now, I don't listen to any of their shows, so maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect there's always going to be a market for the people that do care and that those shows, because the creators care, will probably be the ones that rise to the top. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Look at movies. How many of them are done almost entirely on green screen now instead of actually filming it? We can look at
that's fair, yeah,
kind of technology across the board. It changes how things are done. And companies will look at the financial outlay for getting results. So is it going to be worth hiring someone who's going to do all of the manual work that's going to cost them a fortune when they can hire someone who can oversee the process, use a lot more AI technology or whatever tools are available to them to do it a lot more efficiently and quickly?
Yeah, and I want to bring up Andrea's comment. For decently recorded audio, side by side, most people I play for will prefer the human mixed version, but on its own, they don't mind the Auphonic. And kind of to that point, yeah, you're going to get better quality and people notice like human versus, or like, somebody who really knows what they're doing versus somebody who just kind of is doing the bare minimum or, using studio sound. Side by side, yeah, you're going to hear the difference. But you're not listening to things side by side and comparing them. You're just listening to the audio, and we don't have something to compare it to. Like, you don't really notice, the average person doesn't really notice like any of the like imperfections. And so if we got to the point where it's like good enough, is it going to be worth for, I guess, like for most podcasters who are paying for an editor, I could definitely see like the justification of saving money on hiring an editor when they can get something good enough that most of their listeners aren't going to bat an eye at.
Yeah, and I think maybe there's some value in separating out the different parts of it, right? So if I think about the strip silence type function, that's something that probably an AI could do pretty easily if it was trained well. I think editing for story might be something that an AI tool might struggle with a little bit more. Mixing and mastering, that might get there as well. But I do wonder if an AI tool would even struggle with some of the technical editing, like cutting out the ums or whatever parts of that, even if we don't think about story editing, if it would struggle with things like pacing and does that cut actually sound good? Because even as a person doing that, it took me a long time to figure out which ones can come out and which ones have to stay because it's part of the conversation. It actually matters. Or this one can come out, but the pacing's not right. Because I will occasionally send my clients a note and say, hey, like this one sounds like it could come out. So you'll notice it when you listen. But when I pulled it out, it just didn't sound right, or it changed the timbre of the conversation or something like that. That to me feels like something that would be really hard to train a tool to do. I don't know though.
I think it's tough because AI can't listen. A really good example I use is you can know how to cut on the zero axis or zero crossing. You can know how to make perfect cuts. But if you can't hear what you're doing, you might cut off an which is a clean cut, perfect cut, but you've got enough of that room reverb on the D or something along those lines where you can still hear a bit of the reverb from the first word. So you can't really cut that out without it calling attention to itself. Until AI can actually hear and kind of determine those types of things, I don't see it completely replacing us. It's still going to need somebody to kind of pilot it and QC.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I think in the interim is kind of the next step in the process for like post-production is like the initial, like a lot of people do that right now with the script. Like they run it through the script, take out the ums, and then they manually go in and fix what the script did, as well as like do their own pasting or whatever. I think I was like, if we're looking at 2030, I could definitely see in the next 7 years, AI with enough training could be able to replicate, like understanding like the pacing, be able to detect like those words that just can't be cut. Like thinking the interim, probably the next step is something along the lines of AI first and then human cleanup.
I would agree with you. The only gap that I see is that for that training to work, the tool has to have a good picture of the before and the after, right? So you can't just feed it a bunch of stuff that's good without it knowing what there was before. And so a tool like Descript is going to have to come a long way in terms of usability so that they can get a good picture of the after. Because if all they get are people that just accept the cuts and then they go off and fix it in something else like Hindenburg or Reaper, then Descript is never going to get better at that. There's never going to be any training from the masses because that tool is just seeing, well, everybody accepted my cuts. I guess we're fine.
You don't want the masses training AI.
No, you don't. That was going to be the next thing.
But to kind of go off topic a little bit in the dystopian thing, I think if you look at Adobe's website and what they are planning to do with their whole podcast thing, I think once they get everything figured out, it's going to change the industry because they want it to be a one-stop shop. You record there, you clean it up, you edit, you publish. It sounds like they want everything done completely in the Adobe space, entirely in their podcast app, and probably entirely by yourself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's kind of a catch-22, right? Because on the one hand, it could make good quality production, I assume. Like, I assume they'll get that dialed in, accessible to people that have $20 a month or whatever they charge. The bad thing is that entire industry is then dependent on their software. And so it never gets better than that tool.
Until another tool comes along.
But that's been Adobe's MO from the
Yes.
beginning. They've completely cornered the creative market. Apple is fighting them some with their in-house tools, but they can't compete with what Adobe's got. Adobe's become the kind of de facto industry standard for creatives.
I would agree with that. I think Apple has a couple things stacked against them in that they are unwilling to develop a cross-platform solution. So they're losing 2/3 of the market in terms of CPUs. But I would also say that DaVinci Resolve, for example, is giving Adobe Premiere a run for its money because Adobe has kind of sat on their hands for the last couple of years and not really moved a couple things forward. And so there is, I think, still room for disruption. So there's hopefully Adobe will pick it up and move the whole industry forward, because that competition between those is what actually spurs each company to get better. User requests are great, but it's really competition where somebody else is filling those requests faster than you can that causes a company to go faster.
So I know like AI is pretty unprecedented, so it's hard to kind of look at the past. But it has like, what other industries has Adobe done that to? Like obviously, like you said, they've cornered the creative market. But like, what kind of effects has that seen in other industries, if you know?
In what way?
So I'm just thinking like, because like when you think of like photo editing, it's Photoshop.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to like think of like what has Photoshop done to photography, or like other Adobe things have done to like graphic design or whatnot, that maybe we can kind of see, like look to what could happen in podcasting. I don't know if any of that makes sense outside my own head.
I can't answer that in terms of Adobe, but one place I have seen something very similar is in like web design. If you think back 15 years ago, you were still having to hire somebody to code your website. You were paying thousands of dollars for a 3-page website. WordPress came out, all of the plugins. Then you got the front end designers, stuff like, I'm drawing a blank on them.
But Divi's the one that I use.
All of those. So now there's so many people that think they can design their own websites because they can. Doesn't mean they're all good, but they have the ability to create websites. So the market starts to get flooded, pushes the pricing down. There's a lot of competition, and then all of a sudden nobody wants to pay to have more than a few $100s to get a website done. Because if I'm going to pay $1,000, I might as well just do it myself in a weekend.
And then we also saw that in music with like digital audio workstations kind of devaluing the price of like in-studio recording. So people can kind of do all their mixes at home, even though it's not nearly to the same level, you can kind of still do it.
Yeah.
So we kind of see in like, will people pay our prices if they can just kind of run it through Adobe's plugin or like the Adobe suite and kind of do it all themselves? And if that's the future, like I'm wondering like, where do we fit in if there is a place? Like what can we do to adapt for that future?
One thing I'm wondering is, before we talk about adapting, should we talk about what it could look like if everything goes our way?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I spent a lot of time thinking about what I would like the future to look like. And so I wanted to share a little bit of that before we get too stuck on how wrong things could go. So when I think about a day in the life, in my perfect utopia, podcast editor, that's me, wakes up in the morning, and the first thing I do is notice that some AI tool has already organized my calendar and my email. It's already put all of the email newsletters except for Sweetwater in a separate folder where I can just one click unsubscribe to everything. It's gone through and prioritized all of my workload based on the estimated time to complete and when it's due, so I don't have to worry about all of that. It's already created all of my session templates and brought in all of the files and done the initial bit. Once I get done listening to a little bit, I go through and use a couple of tools to something like what I'm doing currently with Sonable to quickly dial in and the EQ and the compression. I use a tool to do something similar to the strip silence and kind of take a look at that. But then I listen through and I go, okay, am I willing to accept this kind of the QC type stuff that you talked about, Jesse, but maybe with a little bit more creativity than just yes, no, finalize the session and then send it off to a separate server where it uses that processor time to mix down and send it off to the client while I move on to the next one. And as soon as I get a notification, then I quickly send that email to the client and say, hey, your thing is ready. you should go check it out. So that's my utopia. What are you guys thinking of?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
It does, but I have to wonder how many clients do we need to have in this utopia to maintain our whatever we need to make as a business.
You're going to turn my utopia into a dystopia quick, aren't you?
Not my intention. It just what popped up.
Yeah, I mean, because that kind of puts you in the world of the mastering engineer, right? Where they need a lot of clients in order to make a living.
So it's utopia as far as workflow, but then now we have to do a lot more marketing and branding and content creation, searching for clients, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Utopia in one way starts turning into dystopia in others.
So we just need AI to do the marketing and branding and all that for us to find the clients.
I'm changing my answer to that one.
No, I was thinking like it's hard to think of like what the utopic looks like. Because honestly, like it probably would be do it.
I'm a blank on that.
Andrea says that she would love to have the AI robot that does her sales and marketing. I would agree with her.
Wouldn't we all?
And Steve says he would miss the art of the post-production process. Sometimes his clients want them to put stuff in, want them to occasionally do that, and he can see an AI doing everything but that. I think that's fair.
Could be like another utopic to where, maybe not utopic for Jesse who enjoys it, but kind of the cleanup and some like the EQing, AI taking care of that. And then we kind of focus on maybe like the more fun aspects, narrative, pacing, adding in the sound effects, and kind of being a little more creative with creating the show.
I guess my answer would be kind of tying in with where Daniel was going, and that's in adapting. Mm-hmm. I guess in my utopia, I move away from interview-based shows and more into narrative, more creative type shows that are going to be more difficult for AI to replace because, like you were saying, Brian, mm-hmm. AI struggles with that creative element. It's not going to understand storytelling and how to reinforce the story with sound the way that we do.
Yeah. One other thing from my utopia that I forgot to share is that I have a second monitor up, and all that does is show all of the streaming Satoshis coming through from all the podcasts that are Podcast 2.0 enabled that are getting those value streams and those boosts, and I'm getting a little tiny split off of every one of those. Which, by the way, if you're watching the show or listening and you want to help support the show, we do offer that. If you're using a new podcast app and you want to stream to us, we do allow that. We have a little split set up. 3 of us, whenever we get Carrie's wallet, we'll get her set up too. But that's a fun thing that I would love to see, because then I know that my work is being received by people. I'm not just doing it and sending it off to a client.
I like that.
So Jesse, your point was well taken, right? Moving toward that more narrative style. What other things are you thinking of in terms of adapting?
In terms of adapting, I go back to this thing called idea of jumping the curve, which is focusing less on, let me check my notes real quick to get this right, to define ourselves more by the value that we provide our clients as opposed to what we do for them. And that's thinking about the big picture, not getting tied into, I'm a podcast editor, that's what I do, that's all I'm going to be able to do. Because if we paint ourselves into that box, it's going to be hard to adapt. If you do like SWOT charts as part of your business, the opportunities and threats are the big thing to really kind of pay attention to. Opportunities for people like us, a lot of us have started moving into video work. That's one of the easy ones. We can start looking at moving into podcast management. There's a huge content creation market out there outside of just podcasts. If we start to look at that as a bigger market, now we have more clients. We can look at more ways of using our existing skill set or find kind of related skill sets that we could easily pick up to kind of move in new directions.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's actually you mentioned the video editing. That's one of the things that I'm considering picking up. It's not currently my skill set, but there's not a ton of difference in terms of the actual editing, especially if you're doing an interview. Now, in terms of putting together a production, like if you're going to do a much more creative style edit, there's a lot more that goes into it, because then you're choosing B-roll clips and all that kind of stuff as well. And that's beyond my current ability. But one of the things that I'm thinking about doing is starting a show, just me, so that I can learn how to do it, right? So that I'm not learning on a client's dime how to do the editing, but at the same time doing it in context. You're already doing video editing, right?
I am. Anybody that can edit audio, you can edit video. The concepts are fairly similar, but everything you're doing, you're going to cut to the audio anyway. The video is just kind of something that's attached there. And anybody that watches video creators that know what they're doing, they'll all talk about how audio is the most important part. And you can really edit the video without even seeing it because you're just cutting the audio up. You'll want to obviously see the video to do your morph cuts and stuff like that. But anybody that can edit audio well, video is going to be a piece of cake to pick up.
For me, I find that with a little bit of video editing that I've done, I feel like I'm much slower with video editing. Is that your experience as well?
A little bit, just because I'm still learning my workflow. But I think once anybody figures out a workflow with like multicam editing, you create the clip and then it's real quick to go through and just switch up the camera angles. So I'll do like an hour-long video. I'm not doing any kind of content editing except for maybe transitions. So I'll be in and out of the video in probably an hour, and then I'll do the cleanup for the audio and Hindenburg. So maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Okay, cool. Daniel, what are your thoughts as far as setting yourself up for the future?
Yeah, I think video is the easy one, but I think it still kind of puts us in the risk of quickly being outdated. I know I think too, like what my clients are looking for, they're not looking for like, better audio or higher quality video. What they're looking for is growth. And so like if we can come up with strategies, I think focusing more on how do you grow a podcast is probably kind of where I'm wanting to lean to, because that's the biggest issue that a lot of my clients are facing. And that kind of comes in a bunch of different avenues as far as marketing and like getting on different social medias and creating content for different platforms as well.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to looking outside of just the podcasting space. If we start looking at podcasting as part of the content creation space, all content creators have the same needs. They need people that can edit their videos, who can help them figure out how to market themselves so they can continue to get the results that they're looking for. Look around any kind of group. People are asking for, how do I market myself? How do I get more listeners? And it's across the board. YouTube groups, same thing. Social media groups, everybody's looking for that growth element.
I don't disagree with that. One of the risks that I see is potentially ending up overextended and not actually being good at any part of it, right? So I feel like I'm pretty good with the audio, and I feel like I'm kind of getting there with the video very, very slowly because I'm really focused on the audio because that's what my clients are doing right now. Growing a show is something where I'm not really super strong. And of course, I could take a course on that. But at what point have we as individuals grown beyond our ability to do all of the things well?
And I think if we're looking into the future, it kind of comes into the tools that probably aren't out yet. The ones that do speed up your audio post-production. Because back in the day, you'd have to, like, if you wanted to create content for multiple platforms, you'd have to like do each one separately. And now you can just like upload a video to like a website, and then it spits out, a YouTube style video, Instagram reel, TikTok, it automatically does all this stuff, cutting out a lot of time. So I was thinking, as tools come out that can speed up the workflow. So like if you want to be a kind of full service agency type, there's AI tools like Capshow that can do show notes with a little bit of tweaking. Same thing, like transcripts can be automated quite a bit with just like going in. So you can take what used to take, a task that took a long time, find a quicker route, and that way it frees up a lot of your time. So I'm thinking like as AI advances and audio production can be more handled by AI, that does free up a lot of your time and capacity for some of these tasks that AI can't do or can't do as well yet.
My response to you, Brian, would be you don't have to do it all. There's most of these different areas are very much specialties.
Right.
Social media management is its own thing. Marketing is its own thing. If we're not living it, we're not going to be able to offer the best value to our clients. And I think this is one of the places so many of us kind of struggle, is feeling like we need to do it all. Start finding some partnerships so you can outsource this and build an agency where you're not doing all of the work yourself, but you're able to do anything the client comes to you with. We should be looking at ourselves more of problem solvers, even if we're not doing the work, all of the work ourselves.
And I think even with that, that opens up the opportunity to join an agency, because that can be like incredibly daunting task of trying to like build all these systems to organize all this. But if that's not you and you really like the audio, you can focus on the audio and join in like another kind of agency starting up. I don't know if I worded that concisely, but it's just kind of like what we see like currently. A lot of people who love audio can just join in a bigger, editing agency that finds the clients, and then they can focus on the audio aspect of it. So kind of as more people look to developing these agencies, there's going to be room for you to specialize as well. So if creating an agency seems overwhelming, I feel like there could be a possibility to kind of specialize.
Well, but you and Jesse both in some ways already kind of have a bit of an agency model, right?
Mm-hmm.
Michelle works with you, and Jesse, you guys work together as well, right?
Yeah.
You guys offer brand strategy and website design, I believe marketing, if I remember right.
We've dropped web design because of what I was saying. We're not in it enough to really be able to offer huge value. There's so many moving parts, but yeah, we do brand strategy, marketing, kind of growth strategies, if you want to call it that, as well as audio and video production.
And you do post-production. You think you don't do location sound, but you do on-location recording, right?
If I needed to, yes.
Yeah. And then, Daniel, do you do brand strategy, or do you just do the marketing and management and that kind of stuff?
We do a little bit whenever they launch, but not really like ongoing.
And then you also have a fairly regular communication cycle with your clients to help keep them on track and to support them. So in a lot of ways, I feel like the odd man out here, because I'm the one that doesn't have that marketing side on my business. I do offer some management services, and I've got a little bit of that outsourced. I've been trying to build toward an agency, and I've actually taken a couple steps back this year as a couple of clients had backed off, and some of the contractors I was working with needed their bandwidth back. But that's a challenge, right? To find the right people to work with, especially if you're performing, at least in your own mind, at a very high level. To bring other people in and to trust them with a part of the process is a challenge. Have you guys had to work through any parts of that?
Not myself, but I'm working with one person who has found herself in a situation where she needed to take on some help because she hadn't had a day off in years and was working insane hours. And she's brought on a couple of editors. The first one didn't really work out. The second one she brought in has a lot of skill, but it comes from radio, but he's still not where she wants in terms of like post-production in general, like RX, EQ are things he's struggling with. So I've been working with him on how to kind of develop those skills. So he's delivering results more in line with what she's looking for, because she doesn't want. Right now, she feels like she has to do all of the mixing elements to keep up the standard of quality that she wants for her company, because he doesn't have the skills to do that. So right now, he's just being utilized for like first pass editing.
That's kind of the same situation I found myself in, where I was doing the repair, let them do the edit, and then I would come back and do the mix and master myself. Because plugins are different, right? And it's a whole thing if you stop using stock plugins and start using things like Sonable that help you deliver results, but they don't have the same set of templates that you have. Not really the reason that I've kind of trimmed my team down. or has been trimmed down for me, but still a consideration, because that's a big deal, especially if you've got kind of, I don't want to say a sound, but if your clients have come to expect something, you can't just start substituting in something else and have them not notice.
Exactly.
Yeah. And as for me, it's kind of a similar situation. Like the places that I want to get help with are ones that I have a hard time trusting. 'Cause like with show notes transcripts, like that is not my strength. I don't mind outsourcing that. But it's like when it comes to like the scheduling and kind of those final steps, it's really hard for me to let that go. So I feel like my clients have a lot of trust in me to make sure it gets done. And so I struggle with like having somebody else take over that.
Yeah, in some ways, I wish that I had not started with a joy and a love for the medium and just started with a desire to build a team and make some money, because then I wouldn't feel quite as attached to the results. But yeah, there's a lot of pride, I think. And maybe that's my issue, is that there's a lot of pride that goes with that. And it's hard to give that up and to put it on the line. But I guess that's the next step, right? Is being able to do that.
I think that's the biggest struggle, is letting go of that control. When we are used to doing all of the work ourselves, we control everything except for obviously the recordings. So when we bring somebody in, we're having to give up some of that control and just accept that they aren't me. They have their own way that they edit, and trying to make them sound like me is going to probably lead to more frustration than it's worth.
And that's the same thing our clients may struggle with if they've edited their own show and then they bring us in, right? Will this person make it sound the way I did? Well, no. Hopefully we'll make it sound better, but that's subjective.
We also remember like that pride, or however you want to think about it, is
arrogance.
Kind of a strength. Because I mean, I feel like pride has a negative connotation. I don't want to lean into that, but it's just like the fact that you care so much shows like whenever you are able to let it go, it's going to be a great product at the end, because you're not going to just throw your hands up and kind of be done. It's like hope for the best. Like the quality will still be there when maybe not exactly what you do now, but like the amount that you care and that the struggle to let it go is going to ensure that when you get to that point, it's still going to be worthy of your name.
So one of the things that I've actually thought about quite a bit is I've worked with contractors primarily for the last couple of years. I've actually thought about hiring people as employees, because the thing that's weird with contractors is you're not really supposed to provide training or resources for them, right? Or that at some point they become an employee. You can provide a certain level of direction. And I feel like there's a tension between what I can afford and the results that I want to get, right? And so part of me wants to be able to get somebody who's maybe not quite as advanced and help skill them up so that I can get them at a slightly reduced rate. But I don't feel like I can do that with a contractor, because I shouldn't be providing that training. That's my view. I'm kind of taking this off the rails. Somebody reel me back in.
I can't really reel you back in, because that is something I think there needs to be more talk about, because I think about half the states now have ABC laws as far as determining contractors versus employees, supplying software, making them use specific software, just hiring podcast editors when you run a podcast editing business. These things can really quickly push you from contractor to employee. So and these laws are constantly changing. So it's getting more and more tough to classify contractors. So that's something we've been struggling with, trying to figure out how do we want to move forward, especially with when you have to start considering what state do these people live in? What are the laws there?
Right.
Don't want to take it too far off the rails, but there's some thought that needs to go there.
So for me, what I've tried to do is make sure that I focus on people that actually have a business, right? So that I can write a contract with their business. And then I just make the deliverable the session file rather than the audio file. But I'm not even sure that would hold up. The challenge here is these laws are written primarily to, I guess, partly just to help support tax, like revenue income, and make sure that people aren't getting away with not paying their taxes. But the other part of it is trying to protect individuals who might be taken advantage of by a large company. And that's not us. Like, we're not big companies, at least not most of us, right? We're 2, 3, 4 person operation, maybe at most. And so the laws really don't consider us, and it's really hard to navigate those, especially since none of us have in-house legal counsel either. Right? It's not like we can just call up the attorney we've got on staff. It's a couple $100 to give them a call and go, okay, can I do this with this person? And then have them go, well, actually, that's Wisconsin. I'm not licensed in Wisconsin. You'll have to talk to somebody there.
It's not built for small entrepreneurs like us.
Patrick wants to know if we have some episodes on contracting instead of starting something out himself and do we have episodes on that? I don't think we do. Daniel, do you remember anything?
I don't recall. I feel like it's a topic that, like this, kind of comes up like we get off tangent. I don't know that we've done like a whole episode. We've been meaning to. That's an idea that we've had for a couple months now, is talking to like our contractors about the process. I think we definitely need to do. I don't know, maybe that can be the next episode. It's like contractor versus employee or that kind of thing.
And this is probably the place for us to insert the disclaimer. To the best of my knowledge, none of the people on this call are attorneys. And even if we were, unless you've hired us, we're not your attorney. So do your own research. Please do your own research.
Not an attorney.
Not even close.
I've talked to one a couple times at Podcast Movement. His name is Gordon. Nice guy, but he's not on the call. And even if he was, unless you've hired him, he's not representing you.
Yeah. Very tricky situation.
Is there anything else we need to hit?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, we're a couple minutes early, but do you want to just head on to the Poddex question of the day? So, Jesse, you get to choose. I've got 5 Poddex cards. What number do you want? 1 through 5?
4.
1, 2, 3, 4. This might be a gimme. If you had to teach a class on one thing, what would you teach? For those of you in the chat, you're also allowed to answer that if you're listening later on the episode. Our website doesn't have chat anymore. Sorry about that. So you'll have to just email us, at Podcast Editors Mastermind. If you had to teach a class on one thing, what would you teach? I've been talking. Do either of you have an answer?
I don't know. It'd probably be like video game related because that's my big hobby.
Nice. So I would probably teach something around it would be podcast related, but it would probably be something around the 3 things that you need to consider before you hit record. And it would probably be something like the room is way more important than you think. Focus there first, then think about the microphone and where you put it. And also turn off your air conditioner if it's really, really loud.
On that note, I do hope my air conditioner isn't getting picked up, but it was over 100 degrees today. So I can make only so many concessions.
Patrick says that he's out because he just finished teaching classes. Patrick, I feel like you should be able to teach a class on middle school vocal. I don't know. I think that's what you taught was choir, if I remember right. So, yeah. Jesse, do you have anything?
Does it have to be something I can actually teach on right now? Or if I could
I think it would be even better if you couldn't. That might be fun.
How to live life and enjoy it.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'll take that class.
Yeah, I would too. Patrick says choir and music production. Perfect. Zell says Podcast Editor Mastermind utilized and take advantage of technology to speed up the editing process. Make sure to produce quality outcome. When thinking of pricing the service with the help of AI to help price, editing is not based on how fast you edit, based on quality. I'm hoping that was a class.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all we've got.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. If you've joined us live, if you're listening to the playback of this, thank you so much for listening. And if you're interested in joining the conversation, we would love to have you. We want this to be a conversation because we're not the experts here. And so we'd love to have you join live. You can find us on Facebook as well as YouTube. But you can find all of our links and everything at podcasteditorsmastermind.com. Brian, if somebody wants to be a guest, how do they go about that?
Oh, it's pretty tough. You have to go to podcasteditorsmastermind.com/be a guest. There's a little form there. You fill that out. It sends things off to Mars and Neptune, and then they come back into our inbox. And we reach back out to you and say, hey, would you be interested in being on the show? And you say yes, and then we get it scheduled. And it's going to typically be a Thursday night at 9:05 Eastern because that's the time that usually works for our schedules.
And if you have submitted a request to be a guest and you haven't heard back, please just resubmit. I know we had a bunch of entries and I never got around to them. We have plenty of excuses, but if you haven't heard back and you are still interested in being guests, please reach out. We would love to talk with you. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to find out more about you or whatever, like where can people go to get information?
TansiasterAcademy.com and TansiasterAudio.com.
What is the Academy? Can you tell us more about that?
It started out as the course I created last year for podcast editing, but I felt that it didn't quite deliver what I wanted to, being an on-demand course. So I turned it into kind of a community-powered course where we have a lot more interaction, office hours, people post audio they're working on, asking for help. How do you do this? I create a lot of videos for them saying, okay, with this piece of audio you submitted, this is how I go through and clean it up, or this is how I would EQ it, so that it's a lot more of a back and forth type, almost a classroom type, asynchronous classroom learning experience. And then we added on my wife and sister, since they both have kind of more of a business background, to really have a section that's focused on business skills, because I'm sure we can all relate. Knowing how to edit is one thing. Knowing how to run a podcast editing business is something completely different.
Well, that is amazing. Go check it out. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. And then we'll see you in a few weeks.
Bye.
Bye.
So how much is that?